All right, let's jump right into this. Today, we're exploring a book with a really simple but powerful title, Divine Order. It basically lays out a very specific blueprint for how church communities can, function at their best.
Right out of the gate, the author makes this incredibly honest admission, and that really sets the tone, doesn't it? It shows us that this isn't some abstract ivory tower theory. Nope, this is a practical guide that was born from the author's own mistakes and the hard-won lessons that came from them.
So, what's the core problem this book is even trying to tackle? Well, it frames the whole issue right up front as a fundamental problem of disorder within the church. And the results of this disorder, they're not small. We're talking about really serious, tangible consequences. The author makes the case that without a proper, God-given structure, it's just way too easy for communities to fall into strife, division, and this kind of unhealthy competition that just torpedoes their whole purpose. The book really grounds its entire argument in this one theological idea from 1 Corinthians. And the concept is pretty straightforward. God's very nature is about peace and order, not chaos and confusion. So it follows that the church, which is meant to reflect God, should also operate in that same peace and order. So if disorder is the big problem, what's the solution? Well, that brings us right to the heart of the book, what it actually means when it says divine order.
And the book gets super specific here by pointing to the original Greek word taxis. And this isn't about some vague, fuzzy feeling of harmony. It's talking about something much more concrete, a structured arrangement, a respect for position, and a real sense of dignity in how things are done.
In this slide, it really breaks down what taxes looks like in the real world. The author basically gives us 4 key pillars that hold the whole thing up: knowing there are boundaries, respecting spiritual authority, having proper procedures, and of course, making sure everyone is accountable. Okay, so you've got this system. Where do you even begin to build it? Well, according to the book, it absolutely starts at the top. The focus is squarely on the ethics and responsibilities of pastors and ministers. The core message here is that leaders can't just preach about divine order. They have to live it. They have to model it. The book calls this moving from principle to practice. Basically, leadership has to set the standard that everyone else is going to follow. Now, this is a really critical distinction the book makes. There's a super fine line between guarding the flock and controlling it. And just look at the comparison here. The ideal is to equip people, to guide them, to encourage them. The big warning is against trying to control, manipulate, or just dictate to people. Huge difference. Then the author dives into a very specific ethical minefield with this kind of clever phrase, right? He warns ministers about misusing prophetic claims, whether by exaggerating or just making things up, to gain influence. He calls it prophesying. And to keep things orderly between different church communities, the book lays out a really clear spiritual protocol for counseling. The first and most important step for any minister is to ask someone from another church, "Hey, have you talked with your own pastor about this?" The whole point is to always honor and respect the spiritual authority that's already in place. But listen, this whole divine order thing is definitely not a one-way street. It takes commitment from everyone, which brings us to the proper conduct that's expected from the church members themselves. So first, the book establishes the biblical foundation for the pastor's role. It uses this verse from Acts to show that overseers, or shepherds, are put in place by the Holy Spirit. It's a sacred duty they have to care for the flock. And then, right alongside that, it shows us the other side of the coin, the sheep's responsibility. This verse from Hebrews calls for submission to that leadership, framing it as a relationship where leaders are actually held accountable for the very souls they're watching over. And this leads to one of the book's biggest warnings. When that divine order gets flipped upside down, when members try to lead the shepherd, maybe using money or flattery or their influence, the author says it's a recipe for disaster. It just reverses the intended structure and leads to a whole lot of confusion. So what does that look like in practice? This slide gives us a great summary of the key behaviors. Be committed to your local church, be teachable, don't stir up trouble, support your church financially, and hey, if you do have to leave, do it with integrity. Okay, so we've looked at the problem, the solution, and what's expected from both leaders and members. But what's the point of it all? What's the end game? This brings us to the final, really motivating part, the promise of increase. And here it is, the author's core premise boiled down to its essence. It's a direct cause and effect relationship. The argument is simple. When a church community gets this divine order thing right, it will experience increase. We're talking growth, effectiveness, you name it. And you can really feel the beauty of that idea in this passage from Psalm 133. Unity, which the book says is the direct result of order, isn't just a nice feeling. It's described as the very place where the Lord commanded the blessing. That's powerful stuff.
This slide really lays out the stakes in the clearest way possible. A house united, built on order, it stands strong. It fulfills its purpose. But a house divided by disorder, it just becomes weak and ineffective. The book is basically saying that getting these principles right makes all the difference in the world.
So we've walked through this very clear framework for church health and growth, but it leaves us with a really crucial question to think about, doesn't it? In the messy reality of human relationships, how do we actually tell the difference between healthy, divine order and unhealthy, human control? It's a tension that really every community has to navigate for itself.